Okay, so I guess that gets us started. Welcome everyone to the session on making academia meaningful again, a conversation on research, co-creation and impact. So I'm the host of the session today. My name is Helen Etchanchu. I'm associate professor and chairholder on communication and organizing for sustainability, transformation at Montpellier Business School. And with me today, we have Thomas Franzen, who is senior researcher at the Center for Science and Technology Studies, Leiden University. And we have Sylvia Grawacz, who is assistant professor for strategy at the Godman School of Business at Brock University, Canada. Elke Schissler, she's a professor of business administration and head of the Institute of Organization Science and responsible for programs on teaching and the dean in the dean team of the JKU Business School at Johannes Kepler University, Linz, Austria. And then finally, welcome to Melissa Tsatsek, who is the research and thought leadership manager for the ERP Institute at the University of Michigan. So I'm really excited to be in such a great presence of diverse sustainability experts with different perspectives with us today. So this session, we imagined this as an interactive discussion around different themes that bring a meaning to us in different roles as academics, because we realize that very often academics talk mostly about the creation of research and maybe a little bit less about the valorization and the impact of research. And we figured that this Sustainability Community Centers conference here would be a great way to also talk a little bit more about how we make meaningful research impact through co-creation, for example, with practitioners, but then also engaging with students and our teaching. Then finally, we will also talk about how we are going to bring meaningful research and impact thanks to engaging with different colleagues, but also our families and even friends. And then finally, we will also talk about the role of research or the value of research in society much more broadly. So with this brief introduction now, I'm going to jump into the first theme of today, which is how we engage with practitioners, specifically during and after the research process. So on this theme, I would welcome Melissa from the ERP Institute to start off the discussion, to tell a little bit about your experiences of how you can create impact and value by engaging with practitioners. Thanks, Melissa.
Thanks, Helen. I'm just going to peek at the clock here so I don't speak for too long. But first, I want to thank you for including me in this panel as a non-academic. I'm not a PhD. I'm not a faculty member or researcher. But I've always worked very closely with scientists and with research. My career has involved a number of different themes and sectors, but always has centered around the intersection of science and practice. And I've done this in the public policy space. I've done this in the grant making space. I've done this in the wildland fire context. I've done this in marine aquatic sciences, and more recently and now here in the business and sustainability spaces. And really this, this passion of mine of connecting science and practice is really just a product of my own personal sense of urgency and an impatience, wanting to see meaningful progress. And so I'm really passionate about this, about making the science that that you all produce have an impact on decision making and on management actions. So one of the questions that Helen asked me to speak to was how we at the Urban Institute engage practitioners during and after our research process. And I want to tweak that question a little bit because in a small way, but in a very significant way. In my experience, the most important time to engage practitioners is actually before you begin the research process. So if you're truly seeking to create science or develop science that is going to have an impact on management and on decision making, there are a number of different things that I see as being really critical to that success. And the most important one of those is certainly defining the question and making sure that the question that you're pursuing is in alignment with the needs of those practitioners. So really, making sure that you're answering the questions that they're grappling with, and then that you're understanding where that research is going to go and what it's going to produce. Certainly, there will be academic manuscripts that come out of that research, but for many practitioners, most practitioners, maybe even all, I would say that's not what they need to inform their decision making. So before you actually jump into the research, understanding what is that end goal, what are the outputs and the outcomes that your partners, your collaborators are needing to help inform their decision making. So that before you actually start the science piece is, in my mind, the most critical part. Just making sure that expectations are aligned, that needs are aligned, that timelines are aligned, that there's an understanding of resources and so forth. And then in terms of during the research process, I mean, I don't think I need to tell you all how iterative science really is, but just checking in with your partners or with your science co-creators to ensure that you're going in you're continuing down the right path as your research takes you on different pathways. Just making sure that alignment is still there. And then I could go on and on about this. I'm really passionate about that pre-engagement before you actually jump into the science, and we can talk offline about that or more about that later. But if there's one thing that I would emphasize, it's just that need to really engage with practitioners before you jump into the science, if what you're hoping to do is really influence management or decisions. And the last thing I'll say before handing it back is one of the other question that Helen asked me to think about was what are some of the points of advice that I would give to academics when they're engaging with practitioners to make sure that you're creating and valuing research output. I would just say to just really understand what you're getting into, and that the needs and the incentives and the timelines of academia and of research often don't align well with the needs and timelines and incentives of researchers. So really thinking about how can you find a way to meet common ground and to certainly satisfy the objectives that you need to do to satisfy in your own research, but also meet the needs of your partners. And this is really important, especially for younger scholars. Our younger scholars pre-tenure really need to focus on journal publications. And that's incredibly important for the advancements of certainly the advancement of their career, but also the advancement of science. But just understand that that's not the type of output that is really going to meet the needs of a practitioner. And so if you really want to engage with practitioners on your research, understand that you will have to invest a significant amount of time into developing frameworks or toolboxes or guides for those practitioners to actually use the science. So I will stop there. I could go on and on about all of this. This is something I'm incredibly passionate about. As I've said, I've done this in many different contexts, most recently and currently in the business context. And those fundamental tenets hold true, whether you're talking about resource management or business management. That those fundamental tenets of making sure that you're co-creating and that you're collaborating along the way are the same regardless of the discipline or the sector. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much for all these insights, Melissa. Does any of the other panelists want to add something to what Melissa said? So Melissa said she talked mostly about engaging with practitioners even before we're actually defining our research question. So I think that's a key point here. I mean, you also did hint at some of the challenges we have, specifically junior scholars on a tenure track in terms of these different timelines that we're on. So that makes it particularly challenging. So I think that's also one of the reasons why I personally, but then also probably Sylvia, and I see Nicholas in the room, some of the junior scholars created this impact scholar community, because then, I mean, if you're a scholar interested in creating impact that goes beyond just, the standard conventional research impact in terms of references, citations. So engaging with practitioners, it is quite challenging. So I was wondering maybe if some of the other panelists here can have the experiences to share on doing this, either so in terms of co-creation, so as Melissa said, but then also maybe after you've created your research in terms of valuing your research once it is produced, which is yet another way of creating and enhancing impact. I don't know. I mean, I'm talking to the panelists here specifically. Yeah, Elke, yeah, just feel free to jump in. Yes, go ahead.
I can maybe just add some insights from discussions we've just had during the EGOS, European Group for Organizational Scholars colloquium, where we had a sub-theme on generative action research. And we had especially some junior scholars who were very concerned about what it means for their career if they kind of take this time to engage more with practice and use action theory methods more than sort of the traditional, very rigorous kind of methodologies. And the general sentiment was that it's very important to do this, to maintain a sense of meaningfulness. But that it also means adjusting maybe our researcher identities a bit. And we also discussed about how that, of course, doesn't stop at the junior scholar stage. And I think we discussed a lot about spaces, sort of collaborative spaces where this co-creation could happen. We talked a lot about labs, for example, and we also raised some, so I'm raising more questions than I'm presenting answers, some questions about, okay, so then who designs these spaces, right? And who is invited into these spaces? Who decides which practitioners to take in, and what does that mean again for the kind of knowledge that is co-created? And we of course particularly talked about sort of grand societal challenges, inequality, things like that. And the sense was that we need to be very careful to define these spaces in an inclusive manner, to include marginalized voices, to really make sure this is not an elitist project to which we contribute here. So like I said, more questions than answers, but I thought maybe that fits here. Maybe Melissa, you have something to say about that, how you create or design such spaces at the Erb Institute.
Yeah, I mean, I'm certainly happy to talk a little bit more about how we've been trying, and it's very much a trial and error process. I will, own that and trying to align the, the outputs that we're producing. But I do want to make sure that we provide space. I know I saw that Thomas put in the chat box that he has some comments in his remarks that kind of align with this theme. So happy to circle back to it. I don't want to take up too much time, Helen. So I'll look to you for guidance.
Yeah, no, we're good. So no worries. So because Thomas is going to discuss specifically about how we can evaluate the impact with wider society. So I mean, if you don't mind, then sharing some of the ways in which you've been handling this at the Erb Institute, and then maybe after this we can then circle back to Thomas and
Sure.
go towards wider societal impact of research. Thank you.
Sure. So we actually, about a year ago, first wrapped up our first truly collaborative research project, where we brought together one of our business partners, Ford Motor Company, with a dedicated scholar, a postdoctoral research fellow, to dig into measuring social impact. And without getting into the specificity or the nuance of the research, I will just say it was an incredibly iterative process, and we thought a lot about we spent a lot of time talking about what partners might need on the back end. What are the outputs that they need to inform their management decisions? And a lot of it was actually we initially talked about developing frameworks and decision-making guides to help drive process. What I would say, and this is my own observation, is that perhaps one of the most compelling outputs that we produced was actually just a white paper. It was a simple summary of the research and what was uncovered, and that was something that our partner could use internally to get buy-in for continuing to pursue this path of rethinking how they measure social impact. So something that that explained the research in lay terms, and that our partner was able to use to internally share within their kind of up their chain to help them, like I said, get buy-in to continue the work, because it was just the first few steps in what would certainly be a longer process. Some of the other tools that we use are some simple translational products. So, short blogs, write-ups, kind of describing research. We've tried toolboxes. We use those in our executive education quite a bit. So we keep on trying to find, what are the most impactful outputs, and we'll continue to do that. And a lot of that is based on, the shifts that we make are often based on feedback that we hear from our business partners in terms of what they find effective and useful.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Melissa, just maybe also one very last practical question. So in terms of, because the Europe Institute very often, it is one of these good examples that, other research centers would like to follow. So I was just wondering whether you could tell us a little bit more concretely about how you organize, these different, the relationships, so the sessions specifically around the relations we have with different stakeholders, how we engage with students, with practitioners, with community. So if you could just very briefly tell us a little bit more about, in a nutshell, how do you organize at ERP to manage all these different stakeholders? I think that would be really useful for us.
Yeah, it's really staff, to be totally honest with you. So, I mean, we think of our work in our three platforms. We have our research, we have our education programs at both the undergraduate and the graduate levels, and then we have our business engagement platform. And myself, along with our faculty, or excuse me, our managing director, the work that we do crosses all three of those platforms. So I spend a lot of time with our private sector partners at conferences and roundtables and workshops, just listening. And trying to foster dialogue to help me understand what are the questions they're facing. And then, I try to connect that as best as I can with our faculty affiliates, our faculty members, our postdocs. And I see Nicholas is here in the room. You can talk a little bit more about this, but pulling them into, for speaking engagements when we think that their research is speaking to questions that some of the practitioners are asking. Or thinking about our students, and when our students come to us and say, we're really, I'm really interested in understanding life cycle analysis, then thinking about which of our faculty members is working in that space and connecting them, and then trying to find opportunities to support their engagement in that research, and then amplifying that research. So connecting with our marketing and our communications team and thinking about how can we put that knowledge out there. So it's a heavy lift, but it really does, I do think, require staffing to help keep those connections and to help maintain those connections, because our faculty and our postdocs, they have a lot on their plates. Our students have a lot on their plates, and our business partners have a lot on their plates. And so trying to serve as a conduit, if you will, between those stakeholder groups is, I think is something that staff are uniquely positioned to do.
Great, thank you so much. So now I guess now we are ready to move on to the next stakeholder, which is wider society. So how can we value research within wider society in general? So I would invite Thomas to share his experiences specifically from a social and science and technology studies perspective. So Thomas, please.
Thank you very much. I think, well, my comments really align with Melissa, because, well, I will tell you a little bit about what I think, because I'm a little bit of an outsider. I work in science and technology studies, and my work is focused on questions to do with the evaluation of funding of research in academia. And a question that was asked in the context of this panel was, how can we value research within wider society? And I'm a bit eigenwijs, which is a Dutch word that's very hard to translate. So I would want to rephrase the question and ask, how do we make sure that we do research that is valuable for society? Because I very often feel that this is a far bigger challenge. And I think for me, a big question right now is how we align our values, the content of our work, and the goals of societal partners in the context of climate change, while simultaneously making sure that we survive in academia. This is a bit of a mouthful, but ideally, I think our work would embody our values and contribute to particular goals that are in line with for instance, planetary boundaries, SDGs, Paris Climate Accord, what have you. And I see two factors in my work that currently impede on doing this, or like they don't help at all in making this possible. And I feel that sometimes they also make our work unvaluable in line with or in relation to these values. So the first one was already mentioned, and that's that we get caught up in status games in academia and feel that to be valued, it's necessary to, for instance, publish in journals that take years and years to get articles in them. So apparently this knowledge is so valuable that it needs to be in the best journal that we can possibly find, but it's also so not urgent that it can wait 2-3 years of R&Rs before it gets published. So in a sense, and this is why I really liked Melissa's comment about the white paper. So most probably we have other ways of communicating urgent messages from our research. So that's what we do. And then separately, we're in this process of getting these articles in these journals that take a few years, but that's an entirely different game. So there we're not busy with making societal value, we're busy with surviving in academia. And of course, it is very important to publish in nice journals, also for education, to sort of get your work in the academic record and the academic archive. But I think we have to go to a form of publishing where we understand that the article is probably the least valuable thing, societally speaking, that we produce. So we produce it for someone else, and we very often produce it because we have to, because of career pressure. So the second, and this is, I think, a major problem, and it's also a major problem of our employers. I don't think it's our fault. I'll come back to that. So the second one is that to align your work with the values you hold high. For instance, the SDGs, we see that in Europe and in the SDGs, there are inherent tensions, for instance, between sustainability and economic growth. And I think this is especially interesting in a business school context, where you might work with very big companies that probably still prioritize growth over sustainability. And I am wondering more and more how we can navigate this to make sure that at the end of the day, we make a positive difference. And that difference is then not to economic growth or to a radical form of economic growth that is also sustainable. But also how then we say no if it goes into a direction that we don't feel comfortable with. And I think this is very hard in an age where project funding is more and more important. So in two ways, both through publishing and through the requirement to get funding, our employer is pushing us to not align our values and not make a positive difference. So then to make academic work meaningful, we have to make sure our work actually contributes to making the world a better place, while also surviving in academia. So I think we need our employers also to engage with, if they really want to, and I think in sustainability centers, this is a very important question. If they really want us to do good, they will have to allow us to survive while doing good and not survive despite of doing good. So this is why I work on changing research evaluation frameworks and practices. And this is why we need to develop a very radical, different idea of what research quality is. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Thomas. So you are advocating that sustainability centers would be an ideal platform or space for allowing this alternative way of doing research that has more direct impact.
Yes, if we cannot do it in sustainability centers, then I think everything is lost.
Thank you, Thomas. Do any of the panelists want to add to or react to what Thomas just said?
Yes, I wanted to add another dimension of societal impact. I mean, the one part that was already mentioned, right? It's writing white papers or stakeholder reports. That's what we called it in our project. Engaging with practitioners in the process of doing mostly it works with qualitative research quite naturally, approaching policymakers. So that is one part that is really closely aligned to the research process. And I guess that is relatively feasible to do. We don't really know how big the impact of that ever is, if what we do is picked up by them or not. But then, of course, there's the public, right? The wider public. And there are the increasing expectations that we as scientists also have an impact by making statements in the public and so on. And I think that is a very tricky area because we see how science is contested. We've seen it with climate scientists for a long time. We see it now very clearly with the COVID pandemic, how individual scientists that are quite vocal in the media are being attacked, right? They get death threats. What they say is being dragged into populists and turned around and so on. And this is a really difficult turf. But of course, this wider public is where you can have an impact on the debate. And I suppose we should all play a role somehow in spreading real science and countering fake news and so on. But we have very little training in doing that. We have very little, at least in Germany, Austria, very little institutional backing. So this is a tricky realm. And I just want to highlight one initiative that I'm involved in Austria. It's a think tank that a colleague of mine has co-founded, the Momentum Institute. It's a think tank that is science-based, that is not funded by the usual big spenders, but it's called the think tank of the many. So it lives of many individual contributions. And it's really a new form of journalism that in Austria in particular, where the media is very increasingly state-controlled, is very necessary. And it's science-based. It's trying out new formats like videos in which basically the sort of fake news that are being produced are being countered, but also in a funny and approachable way. They've now also opened a TikTok channel and so on with scientific facts. And I have the impression that that is real impact. They have lots of followers, lots of viewers, but it's not the scientists producing or communicating directly, it's professional journalists that work at this think tank, and they are dealing with the public, but the scientists, of course, produce the research and the input. And that, I think, is a very strong way of actually having an impact and something we should pursue further.
Thank you, Elke. So I would get into the next section of our discussion. I see that we have lots of discussion, also comments in the chat. We'll get back to this later and open the floor to everyone. But now maybe let's move to Sylvia and talk a little bit about also the role of our colleagues and engaging even with families and friends in supporting us in these research endeavors. So over to you, Sylvia. So how do your colleagues, family, friends help you in achieving meaningful research for you?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much, Helen, for inviting me, and thank you to everyone for the great discussion so far. I really resonate with what you're saying, and also how we can kind of create impact. But for me, and what I would like to add to the discussion is really creating impact is kind of a two-way relationship. So it's not only our desire to creating impact and to engage with the society and other colleagues, it's also being open to get inspired from them and kind of getting meaning from them. And I wanted to share with you kind of two ways how I get kind of inspired in my work, and how my family and my colleagues are inspiring me. And what always kind of keeps me in mind, because that's why I will mention my family first, is we always get the advice, especially as early career scholars, if we go out and want to engage with society, we should be able to find easy words for the layperson. And very often we hear kind of, okay, you should be able to tell it to your grandpa or your grandmother, right? So that she can understand it. And for me, that's actually a very important point for me. For me, it's my dad. So to be able to tell my dad what my research is and what it is about, because he was the one, he kind of inspired me to be interested in sustainability. He really kind of was the key person in my life so far. And the reason for this is actually after his dissertation around 30 years ago, he founded his own company, and the company, they manufactured wood crushers and recycling machines. And he would not only show me and my sisters kind of what it means to be an entrepreneur and to really go through very difficult times. He also made sure that we show that he showed us all the landfills. He kind of traveled around with us in Europe. He showed us different landfills. He kept talking about kind of the dirty sides of society. And these impressions kind of stayed with me, because he showed us how to kind of value nature, how to kind of appreciate the value that even is in the last piece of what we are using as a society, kind of in all its element there's value. And he was actually, I think, I would say he was the one who kind of made me a systems thinker, to really think about from the beginning to the end what we produce and how it is used at the end, or even not, how to take value out of it and how to appreciate nature. So even though he's retired now, I still see value in kind of talking to him. He always kind of inspires me. And I have to say, I'm actually not the one translating my research. It's my dad. Whenever I try to, or I'm not able to find the right words, he's the one translating it, and he still does a lot of voluntary work, and he tries to apply every kind of little piece of information I'm able to tell him. He tries to apply it in his own context, and he brings it out to the world, and he really does voluntary work across the world, and he brings it everywhere because he learns it from me. And that's, I find, really inspiring, and that's what I always keep in mind. I should be able to tell this my dad, because he's the one in close contact to the real business people out there, not me. But over the last years, I have to say, once I started my postdoc with Tima a few years ago, and I started working with Garima, I also learned how important it is to have a good network, to have great colleagues, because as a PhD student, I have to say I didn't have this. I was at a very large department. We were 35 PhDs in that department, but I was the only one doing sustainability work. And I felt alone. I felt very much lost, and I wasn't sure if I should continue academia. And I had the luck to work together with Tima, to join her as a postdoc, and to work with Garima, and they really showed me how valuable it is to have colleagues. And I felt very lucky, to be honest, that I had this opportunity, because I know there are so many other young scholars out there that don't have these opportunities, that they feel lonely, but they have great stories to tell. So what I did last year, and Helen already mentioned it, together with Nicholas and Garima, we founded the Impact Scholar community that is in particular for early career scholars that have the desire to become impact scholars, but they don't have the means, or they don't have the right network to it. And we really want to provide a platform. We want to provide tools that helps them to become these engaged scholars. And we also want to have critical discussions to think about the pros and cons of doing it, and is it the right way to do pre-tenure or not. And the idea really came about attending a lot of conferences like this ones, where you are an early career scholars. You have a lot of panels at ARM, EGOS or so, where you hear about those great stories. You have those great examples by senior scholars in the room who give you advices, but you leave the conference and you say, okay, what should I do next? I actually don't have the network at my department, or and you start to become depressed, or you get lost from this inspiration. And we wanted to establish this community to have a regular engagement, not only from one conference to another one. We want to be there for everyone throughout the time. So we are very active. We are organizing events, 4 events a year, where we really engage with early career scholars. We are very active on Twitter. We're also thinking about different ways of having a better community. And so far, it goes very well. We have over 600 members that are really interested in the discussion. We have a lot of people on Twitter following us, and I would really like to encourage you to join us, not even this early career scholars, also the senior scholars or even practitioners. We are very open to everyone, because we are interested in this intergenerational exchange and different types of experiences. So please feel free to join us. And I would say I will hand over now to you, and to hear your stories about who inspires you. And yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sylvia. Any of the panelists wants to add how they derive meaning and motivation, I guess, to continue in this challenging work of impactful research? Do you have any other stories to share with colleagues, friends, family? If that's not the case, then I would say let's go move on to students now. Obviously, one of the ways in which arguably we as academics could have most meaningful impact is through our teaching and our engagement with students. So Elke, could you tell us a little bit about how you involve students in your different activities around sustainability, and how you derive meaning for them, for yourself, and maybe even also for your institution more broadly?
Yes, sure. I mean, I think in most of the discussions I've participated in about impact, it's always that's the students are the main avenue of impact that we really have, because with the teaching we can reach so many people, young people who are still have their careers ahead in different organizations, in different societal contexts. And I don't have best practices there yet. It's more something that I'm really trying to explore and continue to strengthen, of how to really build sustainability aspects into all of my teaching. And the same holds for inclusivity aspects, by the way. So at JKU, we're probably not at the forefront of all this, but developing in this direction. And for instance, it says in the statutes that there has to be a gender course in all the courses offered at JKU. Well, guess what? The gender and diversity course is the course no one likes, right? Because it's that obligatory course that everyone has to attend to kind of be morally indoctrinated. And I think what is much better is to make sure that really everyone includes inclusivity aspects, and the same argument would hold for sustainability aspects, into each and every one of their courses. So inclusivity matters, of course, in management, in leadership, but it matters also in the finance subjects, in the corporate governance subjects, and so on. And there should be at least one session, if not more, in every one of the courses. And I think we, as the ones responsible for developing curricula, should do the same thing when it comes to climate aspects, because everything we do in all the different areas of business affect what goes on with the environment, and where companies steer and how seriously they take this. But of course, this is a really long way ahead. And as it stands, it is still mostly compartmentalized into specific courses. But I've been involved in the redevelopment of our bachelor's program, which is a very big program with 500 to 800 students starting each year. And one thing we did there was to make a core course, core introductory course on the topic, which we haven't had before, addressing sustainability, addressing circular economy, and various ideas around that. We've introduced a new major on the topic, which really brings in colleagues, one from the finance department, one from the engineering department, myself, and we're also offering modules in other majors. So we have a supply chain operations management major, very sort of technically oriented, but the colleague there was very open for us to offer a module there too on the sustainability of supply chain. So that way, we really try to disseminate this more, but I think there's much more to do. And then a second thing I'm experimenting with is moving away from the sort of textbook knowledge, but if the course size allows, to really discuss the problems at hand. So the basic assumption is we need to really change what we're doing, right? And pose this question to the students and work with them on developing ideas of what could be done, how we could achieve systems change, reflect on what a desirable future would be and what the barriers are towards getting there, and do that in a very sort of problem-focused manner. That's something I certainly aspire to do more. But I'm very curious to hear what others have to say.
Thanks so much, Elke. Any other inputs on how you engage students specifically on these topics and how you derive meaning for yourself or for them? Then
Sylvia
yeah. Oh, there's a hand.
Yeah, something I would like to add to it. What we do here at Brock University, and it's kind of very institutionalized, it's what we call service learning programs, where we kind of have, for instance, in my strategy course, we have a local community partner. It can be an NGO or a social entrepreneur, any type of business that would like to engage, where we have group projects where the students are able throughout the whole semester to kind of engage with them and apply the knowledge that they learn from the textbooks, as you said, Elke, or from any kind of other sources that we teach them, to the actual context and to the regional area. And I find this very I find this very inspiring because on the one hand, you kind of open the eyes of students to what's really happening to the area, and also to see the value that they learn from going to the university and the theories that we teach them, but also we engage closer with the community partners, and they take a lot of value out of it. I mean, we always tell them, well, these are just undergraduate students, they're still learning. You might not have the same output as you might get if you go through a consultant. But they really appreciate it, and they see the value in every little idea, even if it just sparks a small idea. These presentations, they come back, and we are also thinking about now to establish just a research center around this idea, that we help more of those community partners and more of those students to bridge the gap and to work more closely together. So
Thanks, Sylvia. So bringing practitioners also into the classroom, clearly, that's one way. I would just also add maybe a couple of other reflections or experiences from my end. So I mean, like you said, Elke, so we should also think about innovative teaching activities, really. I mean, so and these topics in general around sustainability, and students also ask a much more critical engagement, much more direct ways of kind of like an inverse classroom type of experience, much more open discussion, and really learning from one another, because these are topics where when we talk also about, you know, the news, I mean, you mentioned journalists earlier, because it feels like we are really living kind of like a paradigm change and a great transition phase in general. So there, you know, the students come into the classroom with all these big questions, and specifically around the role of business being one of the bad guys in a sense, right? And so they are really thirsty for these discussions and critical reflection, without actually a professor having slides and telling them, you know, about this or that theory. So I think there's also one way for us to make room for more creative teaching experiences for students that are much less in a top-down, I guess, logic of things. And then coupled, however, with so you mentioned earlier that now you have the approach of including sustainability into all, you know, across different classes. But then what we see is that we also need to teach professors and staff. So, I mean, we didn't talk about this as one of the stakeholders here. I mean, it's our colleagues basically, right? So teaching our colleagues also, because, you know, if you're a standard marketing, finance, strategy professor with, you know, not a big sustainability background, usually our colleagues feel uncomfortable adding these topics in their classes, and they don't feel legitimate either and knowledgeable enough. So I think, you know, one great way also would be to share these experiences of how you actually engage sustainability content in these different innovative formats, and I think there are lots of different creative ways of doing this. So anyway, so this is from my end. Please jump in if you have any more questions or comments at this stage. Maybe coming back to a few of the questions that were raised earlier on already in the chat box. So one of the questions to you, Melissa, specifically about the Innovation Forum. So you mentioned earlier that this is one way of connecting practitioners and academics. If you could tell us more about this. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I did put the link in the chat box. The Innovation Forum is an organization based in the UK that we have a long-standing relationship with. They essentially host convenings, and they host conferences on anything from you know, the future of food and ag to landscape level planning to business sustainability impact to, you know, really quite a spectrum. Human rights, but at most, you know, everything falls within the business sustainability context. We've partnered with them in a number of ways. We started out just by building a relationship with this organization, primarily because we wanted to have access to industry insights. So we started going to conferences just to learn about you know, the questions and topics and discussions that that were happening in that space. And then gradually over time, that relationship has grown for us, where we have pre-COVID co-sponsored convenings here in the US. And that creates opportunity for us to help shape the dialogue a little bit, if you will. So we look for opportunities to pull in our scholars, whether they be faculty members or postdocs, we look for opportunities to pull in our students, even if it's just helping to run some of the panels or to participate on some of the panels, just to start to build those connections between, you know, what's happening in the research space and what's happening in the practice space. And it's, you know, and really focus on dialogue more than anything else. We've been able to pull in a number of our scholars into they have a podcast series as well on business sustainability. So some of our researchers, our faculty members have been guests on that podcast, just helping to shape that conversation as well. But that's one example. I mean, there's a number of convenings where we try to do sponsorships and look for speaking placements for our faculty and our postdocs. So I would say, you know, Innovation Forum is a great example of what I see as being an industry conference, or that hosts industry conferences that really try to get at the crux of what the challenges are that business sustainability professionals are facing. Most of their speakers are at the director level or higher. As Nicholas said, we do also have a relationship with Sustainable Brands. That convening, in my experience, has a little bit of a different feel to it, but another opportunity again for us to help get our research out there and help to kind of pique interest in how science can inform practice.
Great, thanks so much, Melissa. So then maybe coming back to your question that you put in the chat earlier also about interdisciplinary and collaborative research. So does anyone have experiences to share knowledge about this specifically in the organization studies realm? No, it needs to be.
And well, I will say,
created.
Nicholas did point you to a couple of pieces that Garima and Timo recently put out. One on that co-creation question, on co-creation in the management space, and another on partnering on systematic reviews. So I certainly, you know, looking forward to reading those papers. I don't know how they missed my radar, but this is a space that, you know, I know there's a ton of research in the resource management sectors. Where, you know, it's actually a whole field of study, the study of, you know, science co-creation and how to increase the uptake of knowledge among practitioners, and feels like that's a space that maybe has been explored a little bit less in the management sector.
Yeah, anyone wants to jump in? I think at this stage. So yeah, Elke? No.
Yeah, I mean, on interdisciplinarity, I can also give an example that we discussed during EGOS, the Pivot project, right, from McGill, from Drew Etzion, which is a storytelling platform. It's not a collaboration with natural science, as you might think. Now it's a collaboration with artists, with filmmakers who do storytelling of sustainable businesses, and at JKU, the university here is also trying to strengthen the links with the art university to really work more on this sort of storytelling, imaginative thinking, and so on, which I find super interesting. And then of course there's the natural sciences, which we also need to bring in, but that proves to be a bit harder because. Yeah, but there are also some good examples. We discussed them at our EGOS panel, right? Gail Weidman, who told her story of how she's more the change agent, trying to help the natural scientists in communicating their knowledge to business stakeholders and so on. So I think we need to think about all these different ways of how we can make our research meaningful, which links to what Thomas said, beyond the publication in our management journals itself.
So it does sound like we are always coming back to this problem in general that we're facing. And we also have here this question by Terry Ross in terms of transdisciplinary research, and that there's no straightforward outlet afterwards, right? And generally it's in less prestigious journals, and we don't, I mean, we have different research outlets that we would be interested in as opposed to our colleagues from other disciplines. So clearly this is challenging. And I mean, one reflection that I have, at least at this stage, is that we can't do it all. So I think that's a very, very important lesson that I'm painfully learning at this stage, because if you do want to be a junior scholar with impact, and you do want to do it all in terms of, engaging in this high level impact research in our discipline, but then also having impact, engaging with practitioners, doing transdisciplinary research. I mean, we do need to, so as an individual, I think, there's only so much you can do, and we each need to have our individual strategies. But I would love to have this conversation. Well, I do everything that is humanly possible, Terry. And but so at this stage, I think it would be really helpful to have this at a collective. I mean, to really use, the people in this room to imagine, ways in which we could think about collective strategies, that are going to basically bring individuals together and pull from one another's experiences and expertise, and really joining forces, because and this is clearly one of the things the impact scholar community wanted to do, or wants to do in this achieving, and NBS. I mean, this is why we are here. I mean, clearly, community building around sustainability centered leaders across the world. I mean, this is it really, where we can collectively try to create something that would be, giving us these support structures. This is, I think, really something that we are lacking at this stage. So how can we, in the sustainability centered community, support our individual researchers, junior and also more senior ones, to engage in all these different meaningful works we've discussed? This is an open question for everyone.
May I?
Yes, please. Yeah,
Yes,
just
yes.
jump in.
Okay,
I think it would be
okay.
nice. Thanks, Frank.
Okay, good. I don't have all the answers to this, but I think that our centers and the initiatives like this can serve several roles here. On the one hand, be a platform where experiences can be shared across these different disciplines, across the debates you're having with your finance colleagues or your operations colleagues who might have different ideas or different viewpoints, but also in thinking through, coming to Terry's question, in thinking through, like, okay, how can we make sure that working on these topics is not held against you in terms of publication records? I think that is getting better and better, and that there's more and more room also in the highest ranking journals for the kind of work we are doing. Yet then we come back to where we started, going back to where Thomas and others were taking us. If it takes us 5 years to get something published there, well, we might want to try and find quicker ways to try and draw attention to what we are doing in small workshops in the school, in workshops with stakeholder platforms, and in working with often dedicated student associations. We have a lot of different teams of student associations, from the more entrepreneurial ones to the sustainability community of students. There's a variety of them, and working with them can help. And I think that if I look at my school, we are currently being seen over the last 5 years. I think the dean is way more aware of the central position of sustainability than they were 5 to 10 years ago, and that also gives us leverage to start new initiatives and to pull in others, and thereby hope that things also trickle through in other domains, in other departments, for instance.
Thanks so much for sharing, Frank. Are there any other questions from the audience that I may have missed in the chat you would like to voice to the panelists or to the whole group?
I would actually like to add something, Helen, because I think sustainability centers have a very important role to play for early career researchers. I think I would have not gone the path of going for an impact related career if I wouldn't have been part of a sustainability center, because especially senior scholars in that center who kind of shapes the culture of it, like Tima, for instance, they give you a lot of protection and assurance that what you're doing is the right way to do. I mean, as I said, I didn't have this feeling during a PhD where there was not a sustainability center at all. I was kind of for my own. But once I joined the sustainability center, I felt kind of safety. I felt protection. I had the intellectual exchange that this is the right way to do, and also the financial support. I mean, not without saying that through those centers, you have the ability to be part of larger projects, to really go out and have, I mean, I did ethnographies. I had a lot of time to not only go out in the field, but to also have another project it's a historical ethnography where I collected over 150,000 pages of documents. I mean, I would have not had the time if I would have not gotten the protection from being part of a center that offers all the possibilities. So I think for early career scholars, it's very important to really shape them and to give them assurance that what they do is the right thing to do.
Thank you, Sylvia. Do you want to share any other comments or questions? I mean, I see that there's a lively discussion going on in the chat.
Helen, if I might chime in.
Please.
Okay. Hi, I'm Ali. I'm a full professor at Rose School of Business at Dalhousie University, Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, and also the director for Center for Research in Sustainable Supply Chain Analytics. And I agree with Frank that there are opportunities and challenges to embed, if you will, sustainable issues in different fields of businesses. But as long as we cover the fundamental areas in operations, marketing, finance, and so on, that will be one way. But I wanted to draw attention for the momentum that we might have, especially these days, regarding the UN SDGs. I couldn't join the first part of this breakout session, so I might have missed that. But in Canada, for example, UN SDGs have been now a more staple strategic goals for the universities, and when evaluating them on their impact on research, UNSDG, the numbers of the UNSDGs that are related to those research programs are being highly regarded, and also that reflects on university rankings as well. So I just wanted to draw attention that this will be we are in a good position, and the more we relate our sustainability research to certain UNSDG clusters or specific UNSDG, that's a good thing. So we are on a roll. We just have to achieve multidisciplinarity and that collaboration. And I invite anyone who wants to work with me. That will be awesome. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Anyone wants to react to this? Because we need to wrap up the session very soon. And then Ekaterina told us there's going to be a network session, or how do you call it, like a social, right, coming up. So then we can continue the conversation and connect with one another and follow Ali's invitation. So I guess at this stage would probably be a good way for me to just sum up the discussion. Thank all the panelists. I'm going to, so the session is recorded. I'm also going to save all the comments and references and great links that were shared, some of the resources that were shared in the chat. So I hope that will also be available to you after this. And again, thank you so much, Thomas, Melissa, Sylvia, and Elke for sharing your insights. Thanks to the audience for all your great questions and comments. So clearly, I think we are onto something in terms of, really taking this forward and creating, using the Sustainability Centers community for trying to leveraging all our individual efforts as individuals within the institutions, also the efforts of every single individual institution, but to even, build community beyond this. So I think then, maybe if you want to create continue conversation after this, I think there's really great opportunity to learn from one another and and cross-fertilize. So thanks again, and looking forward to speaking more with you during the social. Bye, everyone. Have a good day.
Thanks, Helen. Bye-bye.